Asia Oceania. In some of the Christian territories here in Asia Oceania, BECs are getting more and more popular. Here in the Philippines, of course, we have the BECs, but I know in some other places they also have BECs. Now, the there are millions and millions of poor people here in Asia, and so that is the number one concern of the Asian church: how to dialogue with people who are poor and people who have different cultures and different religions. So the triple dialogue with poverty, religions, and cultures. Asia, Oceania is in a way unique because we have many religions, we have many cultures. Almost every country has a particular culture. And even in some countries, you have several cultures, but of course, millions and millions of poor people. So, according to FABC, the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences, that is the number one concern for the church here in Asia Oceania: to take care of the poor and to dialogue with people who have different religious faith and, of course, different cultures. There are two important factors that need to be considered. That is, one is to express faith according to the specific culture of a country or region. It doesn't suffice anymore to import European Christianity into our own places. They need to inculturate our faith. But we're talking here about inculturating faith almost in every region, in every nook and corner in Asia, because there are so many different cultures in Asia. So the idea of variety of enculturation, but also to develop communities that would allow for exchange, dialogue on the human level according to one's cultural heritage. Okay, in other words, not to develop a kind of a religious culture, but only for one particular culture, but you have to make them dialogue with one another. There's a great deal of interest in BECs, which is now trying to give us new ways of looking at not only the church or the ecclesial structure or the ecclesial organization, but also ministry in the church. There is, of course, collaboration between lay people and the ordained, and this is becoming more and more, present, especially in areas where there are just so many people in one particular parish. Here in the Philippines, I think every parish would probably have minimum of about 25 to 30,000 people, and that's just a small group. In other places, sometimes it's 50,000 or 60,000. So, how about in many other places? So, we're now going beyond the simple distinction between the responsibilities of the ordained people, what we would call the sacred ministers, and the responsibilities of the lay. Okay, in US and Canada, the focus is much more on what we would call professional ministers. In America, they have done a great deal of training of ministers. If you want to be a minister in a parish, you need to undergo very, very extensive training. Okay. Most of the faithful in the US, of course, were at one time immigrants from Europe, especially the Catholic or the Christian countries in Europe. Practically almost all the countries in Europe before the coming of communism were Catholic or Christian. Okay, nowadays in the US, there are now a great number of people coming from Asia, the Philippines, and the Chinese, Indians, and of course, Vietnamese, okay, but also coming from Africa and Latin America. There's a great deal of diversity in the church. Okay, but if you talk about the American church before these new immigrants, it's basically on the well, sometimes they say traditional. Many of the bishops have become very traditional. And that's also partly because John Paul II also had appointed some very traditional bishops in Latin America, in the US, to counteract, of course, the very strong liberal tendencies, especially among theologians, among the schools of theology in America I would say more on the left of the center than traditional. The typology that is used in Lumen Gentium about the laity being involved in the transformation of the social order is something that you would easily see in the US. The lay involvement is very, very strong. And the lay already had found their voice, that they are able to participate in church life, not just as people who would just support the church in terms of finances, but who can already work in terms of running the parish. Okay. So there are lay ministry, and they are properly endorsed by the bishops. And this lay ministry enable many people to be actively engaged not only in supporting the church and the programs of the church, but in running the parish, administering sections of the parish, etc. For example, many of the parishes before used to have their own parochial schools. And many of those parochial schools were run basically by the sisters. The sisters in the US were very instrumental in running those parochial schools. But nowadays, of course, there are some parishes that are coming together because there are less and less parishioners. So they are being fused. Some of the parishes are fused together. And the catechetical schools or the parochial schools are no longer as vibrant, precisely because there are also alternatives to education, especially faith education. But I know, for example, one particular parochial school which is supported almost exclusively by the lay people. They were the ones who almost run the parochial school. The head, of course, of the parochial school is still the parish priest, but practically everything else is run by the lay people. Fundraising and everything, that's all done by the lay people. Of course, there you have faith formation also in that school. There's also a great deal of the lay ecclesial ministers so for example, people who are visiting the sick, there's a group of people. Some of them are ordained lay deacons, and there are a good number. Almost every parish in the US have a lay deacon, and the lay deacon is in a way a professional lay deacon. He is normally given a kind of a stipend by the parish priest, but he also helps in the Sunday celebration, preparation for the Sunday celebration, and especially also doing giving communion to people who are sick, distributing communion. But aside from that, he has on professional job. He has his own job during the most of the morning and the afternoon. And he does a job for the. But they undergo very rigorous training. The lay deacons undergo very rigorous training. They sometimes have to take 3 years of theology in order to become a deacon. And not only them, but also sometimes their wives. If they are married, their wives also have to undergo training because they are part of the what we would call the community of the deacons. So, what has been most popular in the US is what we call the RCIA, which is the rite of Christian initiation for adults. This is more like instruction, catechetical instruction for those who are asking to be baptized already as adults. This is something that is quite common. It's a very good program, anyway. I will talk about this in my course on initiation, the sacrament of initiation. Yeah. The mission in many different places is towards indigenous communities in the form of BECs, popular missions, chaplaincies, etc. So I know, for example, of some parishes especially in very remote areas in Colorado, in the Arizona, and they have to drive out for hours and hours to reach some of the communities there. And many times it's the lay people who would go and do the what do you call this, the maybe distribute communion there, hold a kind of a priestless Eucharistic celebration. So they're able to do that kind of work, because the priest will only be able to go there maybe once every 6 months. It's quite far. But then also, many women have taken on the ministries in the church and do a lot of things. Many of them are involved in finances. They are the ones who keep track of the financial situation of a parish. In one of the parishes where we were in Los Angeles, for example, our business manager was basically the finance minister of the parish, was a woman, but a woman who is very Catholic and very much, of course, she knew because she's running a business, but she knows exactly what needs to be done. And it was a very, very well run parish in terms of finances. Okay. And also, I know of some other parishes where the pastoral minister, what they call the one who goes visiting all these different all elderly, for example, and all the people who do not come to church regularly are women. They're women. I know some what do you call this? Some people who do that kind of ministry. They're not just the sisters, but they are the they are women in the parish. They have their own jobs, but aside from that, they volunteer to do work. So in the U.S. and Canada, we in a sense they had a professionalization of ministries with corresponding salaries and emoluments. For example, if you are going to be the one playing the organ at mass, you are given a salary, but you are given responsibility for making sure that there is going to be music in during the celebration, that there is a choir that sings, etc. That's your responsibility, but you're given a salary. You're given a salary. If you are doing other work, for example, let's say if you are a deacon, as I said, deacon, you're given a kind of a salary. If you are going to be visiting, for example, the sick people in the hospitals, you're also given a kind of a stipend. So there is, in a way, that is one way of professionalizing the ministries, because it is not just volunteerism. It is something that is done for the church, and the church should acknowledge their share, the work that they are doing on behalf of the ministers, the priests, and the ordained ministers. In Europe, the idea is very much along the lines of the traditional distinction between ordained and the non-ordained. In other words, they're quite clear that the distinction has to be this: whether you're ordained or you are not ordained. But there's a lot of leeway that is also being given to the non-ordained. In other words, they have expanded that idea. Because as you know, ordained ministers in Europe, there are very, very few vocations to the ordained ministry. Very few vocations. For us, for example, the Vincentians in Europe, all throughout Europe, you will be lucky to have, what is this, 20 to 30 candidates. That's very little. When before, only in Spain, in one province of Spain, they would have something like 50, 60, 70. But all throughout Europe now, we only have 30. That's very little, very little. Okay, now, in Europe, there is a genuine development of lay charisms, lay ministers, lay mission. And that of itself diversifies the question about church and order, affecting also the place of the sacrament of order. So because of this development, people are now thinking, what exactly does the ordained ministry offer that the non-ordained cannot do, cannot be in charge of? So now people are thinking, where is what is the root, what is the theological fundament of ordained ministry? We will see this when we talk about the development, historical development of ministry from the time of Jesus up to our own time. So there is a continuous tension between a community-based church in which all, including the ordained, find their place. In other words, you know exactly where your place in the church is, but also a continuing clerical or hierarchical model of the church that is pretty much maintaining what is now what we would call the traditional structure in the church. Europe, in a way, is trying to think ahead and try to think in terms of uh, ministry that is being done in the church beyond simply ordination. This is something that needs to be reflected on, investigated uh, in the future. There's a split between the life of the church and its administration, engendered in no small ways by the emergence of new ecclesial movements with an alternate organization and even an assumption of control in parish life. We have become so used to the structure in the church of parish, diocese, and then, of course, the universal church, or if you want, the national church, like the Episcopal Conference. That's been the kind of structure that we have now in Europe. People are thinking, is this the only way to think about the church? Could we organize the church, or could we structure the church in a different way? And especially in terms of the ministries. There are many things that can be done which doesn't necessitate ordination. This doesn't necessitate a particular status in the community or a particular order. Now, why not explore that a little bit more? The challenge, of course, is how are we going to integrate these new communities? This is the new ecclesial movements with traditional structure of the parish and the diocese. Of course, the preference is to make sure that these new ecclesial movements always coordinate with the parish. If there's any one good thing we can say about El Shaddai, is that El Shaddai always makes sure that the people who come to their celebration in Luneta or wherever always go back to their own parishes, because they always pertain to their parish. They're told you belong to a particular parish, so you take care also of the needs of your parish. Okay. But there are some other ecclesial movements that seem to go beyond the parish or beyond the diocese, which is, again, undermining a little bit the role of the bishop. Because if you are trans-parochial or if you are trans-diocesan, that means you have members who belong to one diocese or to several dioceses, and your members, they owe their allegiance to you rather than to their parish priest or to their bishop. In which case, this is a new organizational structure now in the church. So, all right. So, this emergence of a new possibility for church organization, a church structure, of course, is much more deliberated on by people in the academy. In the process, of course, candidates and the choice of candidates become problematic, because many people would rather not join the seminaries because they can do other work even as lay people. So, all right. Summing up, therefore, situation in the church in the different regions in the world in reference to how church ministry is being undertaken. In Latin America, we have the BECs. In Asia, we also have BECs in other religions and the poor. In Africa, poor and new evangelization. In Europe, between the ordained and non-ordained. In the US, Canada, professionalization ministries. Okay, now just some reflections on these missions. Mission and thus ministry, whether ordained or not, depend largely on the context of such program or activity. Again, if you belong to Africa, it's one. If you belong to what do you call this, to Latin America, that's another. If you belong to Asia, that's completely different because of the diversity of religions. Now, Jan Sobrino has written something about church ministries, and basically his perspective is a perspective coming from the south in relation to the people in the north. He agrees with Comblin, who was also a, what do you call this, writer, a Latin American theologian, who divides the world into the oppressors and the oppressed. The two distinct and opposing worlds, with ever growing distance between them and ever increasing unjust opposition. This is of fundamental importance and consequence to church ministry. Okay. Because whether we like it or not, the European church dictates a great deal of time what happens actually in church situations and even in terms of church organizations or church structure all over the world. But the situation in Europe is quite different from the situation in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, especially in the what we would call the South. But they continue to exercise a kind of influence. Sometimes, according to these theologians, outsized kind of influence. Both what is this? Sobrino and Comblin speak about several events in the past that have cemented in a way the domination of the northern countries by the northern countries of the southern countries. For example, Nazi Germany, whether the church is to commit on behalf of the Jews, unlike Bonhoeffer and Albert Delp, or remain the hidden normal church of the uncommitted baptized. Okay, the official church was accused of being in cahoots with the Nazi regime because it was in a way trying to what do you call this cement the power structure in the church. Eventually, of course, the church recognized that supporting Hitler was not good, not only for in terms of church organization, but in terms of morality. Now, the other event, of course, was the conquest of America by the Spaniards. In America, the Spaniards, the Europeans, came to America and subjugated not just what we call this, the local indigenous communities of what we call the Indians, the American Indians, but also eventually those people who were exported from Africa, who were slaves, and they were the ones who eventually ruled over them, and that continues to be a problem up to now in the U.S. A big problem. And exploitation of Africa by Europeans. There was a time after maybe about the First Vatican Council when the countries in Europe divided Africa among themselves. One group belonged to the French, another group to the British, another group to Germany, another group to the Spanish and the Portuguese, etc. As if Africa was their property. But that is what they had done. So, and the subjugation and the looting of South America, subjection and looting of South America by the US. Whether we like it or not, the Latin Americans do not look very kindly at the Americans, because in a way they have always been subservient, made to be subservient to the U.S. Uh, not only in terms of being able to control what's really happening in the Americas, but especially of the world structure, world power that they exercise all over, not only in South America, but all over the world. And that is the context of what Sobrino was trying to say about the North and the South, the relationship between the North and the South. How are we going to think about them in regard to the ministry? If we look simply at the idea of ministry as repeating what has been there in the church, then is it not perpetrating the same kind of mentality that we had received from the Europeans? Should we develop a more creative way, a more indigenous, a more enculturated way of ministering? In other words, using our own traditional cultural, sociocultural structures in our own countries and be able to look at ministry in the church from those perspectives. Let's say, for example, perspectives here in the Philippines, using our own sociological structures in a way of building up our church communities rather than too hierarchical kind of structure, which in the end makes us always beholden to the people who are on top. And more than likely, the people on top will not give up power. So how are we going to do that? According to what is this, Sobrino and company, in order for us to be able to develop this kind of ministry, we need conversion, looking at what Jesus had done, and looking at the priorities of Jesus, especially the poor and the victims. And from that perspective, develop our own ministry. Another one is to focus on the real absolutes. And the real absolutes are God and hunger, or God and poverty. Okay. The absolutes of the North, good life and success, are not the real absolutes. They are passing. So the South provides theology, the ground for its reflection on ministry. Ministry has to be incarnate among the poor and the victims, with compassion in bestowing life, prophecy in denouncing injustice, and hope in restoring the poor's name, dignity, and existence. Ministry with the poor and the women who have been the more consistent followers and disciples of Jesus. And this is something to be focused on by us. In other words, talking about ministry from our own ground experience. In other words, it's almost like a ministry to the world as an anti-kingdom. The kingdom of the world has its own way of developing ministry or developing organizational structure. But the anti-kingdom, we need to develop our own set of organization and structure. All right, this is where we end our. This was a meeting of the different BECs in Nairobi. They came together, and you can imagine the thousands and thousands of people who came for this big celebration of Passion Sunday. Okay, now here's where I